It's because there's a government there for them to use. And it's the same thing with mental institutions and a bunch of other things. I would draw the distinction between, there are private organizations, and here's something that people love to sort of muddle in their head, like the evil corporations. First of all, corporations are created by the state. There can still be big businesses and they can still be run by greedy bastards, but in a free society, all they can do is offer to sell you something. And if one thing that people get muddled in their head about is if some business comes along and says, I will pay you $1 a day to do 10 hours of hard manual labor, he's not oppressing you. If you can say no without him attacking you, he's not oppressing you. If you can't say no without him attacking you, he's governing. But if all you have to do is say, no, that deal sucks, I'm not going to do that, then he is not an oppressor. He can be a greedy butthead, but he can't do anything to you if all he can do is give you an offer that you can say no. Now, again, that's an example of how big business will often, grab ties with government and control all the land in some country and say, you can either work for us or starve to death because you don't get any land and you don't get any of this and you don't get any of that. If the evil, greedy businessman uses force to eliminate your other options and then gives you a bad deal, that's oppression. That's unjust. But if he just comes along and says, I have a really bad deal to offer you, well, what happens if I don't go for it? Nothing. Okay, then you're just kind of obnoxious, but you're not an oppressor. There's nothing immoral about that. You're just kind of stupid and I don't want to play. So again, so many of even the secondary oppressions and injustices depend upon government power, or they don't even exist, even when the oppressor happens to be private or appear private, like the big nasty corporations. Like I always say, take those big nasty corporations, take away their ties to government and see how big and nasty they are the next week when they don't have this massive armed force of authoritarian thugs doing their bidding, when all they can do is offer to sell you something. And if they say, guess what, we own the whole continent just because we say so, and 300 million people say, no you don't, you've only been here, we live here, go away. Corporation goes, oh darn, we don't have an army, we're just us. And even the private armies have to be authorized by government and have the cooperation and tolerance of government. Things like Blackwater and the nasty mercenaries. People say, well, what about them? I say, well, guess who they almost always work for? The government, who says, by the way, you're allowed to go in and terrorize these people, whether it's from this country or some other country. So often the injustices that even appear private to begin with, you follow the tentacles back and they come from government. Because without the ability to violently dominate people, I don't care what somebody offers me if I can just say no thanks.
So since we do currently live under the state or surrounded by people who have adopted the delusion of the state, what does the individual do when someone comes to the door, like one of their enforcers, one of their collection agents, one of their regulators? What recourse do we have in order to confront that? Civil disobedience, opting out? Is it just as simple as just stop participating and try to encourage other people to do likewise? What's our recourse?
Right. The question is basically, since we do live in a society where people do believe in government and there is this big, powerful thing, because people will carry out its orders and enforce its will, what do we do? If you're the only one who gets that this isn't legitimate, well, the SWAT team at your front door probably won't want to have a nice discussion about it. What do we do in a world where there are people willing to commit oppression? And again, I would say the first step is an answer that everybody in the island scenario would understand. Like I use the example of, okay, we just found out the next island over, there's 30, 40 of us, there's 400 cannibals on the other island. They're headed over and they're going to eat us. They outnumber us, so maybe don't try democracy. That's not going to go too well, because they'll just vote to eat us and then eat us. But what do we do about it? If we are outnumbered by the people who advocate violence, what do? The first thing is self-preservation isn't a sin. If the guy shows up at your door, if the choices are hand over some money or die, you might want to choose to hand over some money. Ultimately, the answer is changing the mentality of the people. And we don't get to the final answer to the problem until enough people understand that. In the meantime, everybody has the right of self-defense. And this is the thing I've written about and made videos about and offended and horrified lots of people. because I've talked about the use of forcible defense against government aggressors who have a law that says they're allowed to. I made a video called When Should You Shoot a Cop, which freaked out tons of people. And it looks back in time and says, look through history how often the law enforcers were the ones committing mass murder. Now, do you really want to tell me that it's never okay to resist an aggressor as long as some politician wrote a law saying it was okay? What Mao did, what Stalin did, what Hitler did, what Pol Pot did, they legalized it first because they were authority. We're allowed to do this, haha, here we come.
Forgot Obama.
And Obama and every other president in this country's history. But, so yeah, there is that problem that if you're the only one who knows you're free, it's going to be kind of dangerous. And you still have the right to defend yourself. And in certain cases, you might not want to, because self-preservation might be a better idea than dying in a blaze of glory. And that's a line that, you know, I have my line in a few places, a few things that I will not let them do. I would forcibly resist even if it means I die. But I don't tell other people where to draw that line. I do tell people, if you haven't even thought about that line, or if you don't have a line, you are absolutely a slave. If they can do anything they want to you and you will never resist, you're already a slave. You know, your line might be nowhere near mine, but you better have a line or you're already doomed. You will never be free because you don't even think you should be free because you already think it's evil to defend yourself if the aggressor is law. So, I mean, I can tell where my line is, but kind of who cares? But people better have a line or, you know, you don't get free. Basically, if you're a slave who thinks you're supposed to be a slave, you will be a slave forever. And one of the things, one of the most amazing things I've ever read was the works of Frederick Douglass, who was a slave. And to me, the impressive thing was not that he physically escaped slavery, it was that he mentally escaped it. And to read his accounts of how a lot of the slaves were convinced that they were supposed to be slaves and actually viewed runaway slaves as thieves for stealing themselves from the master. And most people go, how could anyone do that? And I say, do you take pride in being a law-abiding taxpayer? Do you have scorn for the people who try not to pay? Guess what? You're the slave who hates the other slave who tried to run away and views him as the thief for trying not to be robbed. It's still you. They changed the terminology, but they kept the lie, and you still fall for it. And when that lie goes away, and enough people do it, resisting is really easy. You can ignore them. Until then, things are likely to get ugly, because when a certain number of people are willing to stand up for their rights, and a lot of people aren't, it usually ends in a violent conflict of one kind or another. And that's why what I focus on is trying to get people's minds to change, because that ugly thing that's going to happen in between, that's not going to be fun for anybody. I think the U.S. empire is falling. I think a lot of nasty things are going to happen. But ultimately, what I care about is what happens on the other side, and that depends entirely on how many people actually understand and want freedom. I don't care if they hate this particular regime. That doesn't matter in the slightest to me. We've gone through cycles of regimes forever. What matters is when the cycle ends, because people choose freedom.
Oh, that last thing you said. Oh, me or him?
You first.
Okay. But that last thing you said, though, is like, that's why I think that we're still in the kind of education phase of trying, you know, because if you took out government today, we'd just be back in the same boat, you know. But,
yeah.
But what I was going to say is that a lot of those gray, in my experience, a lot of those gray area questions, you know, about anarchism come from the fact that your earlier point, because everybody thinks that, oh, well, anarchism, then everybody goes back to being cavemen or something. But how, you know, what I guess I wanted to push maybe a question or statement, maybe I wanted to hear your voice on it, is like how a lot of those problems get fixed with like voluntary economics, you know, I mean, how big is that? But, you know, I mean, you know, everybody, you know, not just economics meaning money, but just within trade and interaction with people. And so, you know, what's your statement or, you know, in a voice about what that is and how to explain it to people?
Right. I don't know that I can possibly paraphrase what you just said. Anybody who wasn't here just doesn't get to know the question. Yeah, people have a lot of power even if they don't forcibly resist. Even if, you know, by just the way they treat other people, the way they trade, the way they spend their money, the way they live, even a minority of people can have a pretty big impact. And a few examples that come to mind is I look forward to the day when nobody is comfortable being a tax collector because even just half of the people they meet think they're the root of all evil. Because if half the people you meet think you're the root of all evil, you might consider a career change. And that's actually been a major problem for the IRS for decades, that it's really hard to keep them staffed. They have a really fast turnover rate because they get the job and find out everybody hates them. And everybody should hate them. Because ostracizing thieves is a good thing. And again, even if they don't care morally, if they have to be faced every day in and day out with angry people being huffy about them and robbing them, or just people in general saying, ew, you work for the IRS, blah, please go over there, I don't want to have anything to do with you, that's very powerful. The same thing with cops or soldiers or any organization that uses the initiation of violence. If everyone around them condemns them, they feel a major pressure, whatever their own moral code, they feel a major pressure to stop doing that. And that's why I think it's really important, and there are certain things that are trained into us that the people in power know they have to really solidly train these certain things in. Like, of course I support the troops. I don't support the troops. If you're a soldier for any government, you're the bad guy, quit and go home. And the thing is, if everyone in the country said that, nobody would be in the U.S. military. It doesn't mean nobody would defend us. Because if somebody invaded, I know lots and lots of people who aren't in the military who would say, well, I would definitely be one of the ones ready to forcibly defend against an actual invasion. But these are just religious things, and the way people are trained into nationalism and patriotism to feel this deep, profound pride, because you have to train people into that to get them to keep going along with it. Because imagine if, and it's really sad, and I do feel for soldiers who have good intentions and go off and do it. And Vietnam is just a really, really sad testament to what authority does to all the good people. The people who went over, the people who protested, everybody involved. People go over, it's like, well, I thought I was going over to fight for freedom and justice or something or other, my country at least. I came back and everybody hated me. A bunch of evil stuff happened over there that I was not proud of. And the same thing with Iraq war and every other war. And thankfully, there are now a lot of soldiers that come out and say, I joined up to do good stuff, and I figured out we're actually the bad guys. They're the bad guys too. We're not the only bad guys, but I don't think adding some more bad guys to the equation was really the answer. And I come back and a lot of people hate me, and that's kind of uncomfortable. And the suicide rate among soldiers is amazingly just horrible.
Yep.
And it isn't, and I offend people by saying this, but I don't care. I don't think it's because I saw really horrible things. If I saw something really horrible, my first thought is not, I'm going to kill myself.
Guilt.
If I did something really horrible, my first thought would be, I should not be on this planet if I'm capable of that. And I believe a lot of military suicides are that. And I know a bunch of soldiers who say, yes, the suicides are because of that. You can see horrible things and it can really mess you up and gross you out. You don't want to kill yourself because somebody else did something evil. You want to kill yourself because you did something evil. And it's it's horrible that happens at all. I love the fact that we now have the internet so that lots and lots of soldiers can come out and say, I joined up for good reasons, I thought we were the good guy, and then at one point I suddenly noticed, holy smokes, I'm that evil thing that the world needs protecting from. And so I quit. And, to any soldier, I would much rather that instead of killing yourself, you did the braver thing, which is come out and say, I was wrong. I was one of the bad guys, and I'm sorry, and I will never do that again, and I will try to talk other people out of doing that, of being soldiers, of joining the military, of being the police. That is a far braver thing than just taking your own life, because that doesn't fix what you did. If you want to fix what you did, make it so the next guy with good intentions doesn't fall for the same lie.
Okay, two things, one comment, one question.
Okay.
We shouldn't get mixed up between the politicians and the government. We don't elect the government, we elect the politicians. Politicians haven't governed for a very, very long time, since World War II. Politicians are the public relations agency for the government, and it doesn't matter which public relations agency they use. Right? They will rubber stamp into law bills that have been decided and drafted by people in secret elsewhere a long time before they're passed through Congress, unreadable bills and nobody reads them, they just rubber stamp them into law. So let's not mix that one up, and let's not call the whole process democracy either, because I know you had to get kind of through that one fairly fast, and I understand, but they're very different things. The question I have is, if an authoritarian society meets a relatively free society, I'll give you a real historical example. Crazy Horse and his Lakota, a very free society, was up against the US military for the second half of 1876, we'll say, after the Big Horn, and for most of 1877. Now the US military, absolute hierarchy, orders from the top. The Lakota, they were entitled to fight the war or leave the band. But somewhere along the line, Crazy Horse and some of the elders said, no, we're under too much threat, you can't leave. And some families did try to sneak away at night. So Crazy Horse and the warriors came to those people, and they took their lodge poles and they burned them, and they took their horses and they confiscated them. My question, was that wrong? Was that morally wrong?
Yes.
What they did? And what was the alternative is the second part of the question.
I don't, let me back up. The first thing, he made the distinction between government and the politicians, and I'll cover that after we cover this. And he brought up the example of when a authoritarian empire, whatever you want to call it, is up against a relatively free society. He used the example of the Lakota Indians, Crazy Horse, and who resisted for a while. And he talked about the example of the Lakota who said, let's just kind of sneak away, we don't really want to play this. And were actually punished by their own kind for running away. And he asked if that was immoral, and I said yes. Because then Crazy Horse and whoever become the aggressors. Now, if I'm in this room and somebody's saying they're going to come attack me, and the rest of you go, I have nothing to do with this, and walk away, I don't have the right to attack you. I can say, you bunch of chicken turds, thanks a lot. But if I attack you, I'm just as bad as the guy coming to attack me. And the thing is, a free society does not guarantee the good guys win. And that's one of the biggest things, is what people want government for, is a guarantee that the good guy will win. The thing is, government always guarantees the bad guy will win. Lack of government doesn't guarantee anything in any direction. Because maybe you have a giant, in that case, a giant authoritarian empire with lots of soldiers and lots of guns, and the soldiers will blindly do what they're told and commit genocide, which basically happened in this country to the American Indians. And there is no magic guarantee that the good guys will win if they believe in freedom, which is, again, why it's a numbers game. What if all those soldiers for the U.S. cavalry and military and the rest of them said, these people are already living here, I don't think it's okay to attack them just because some guy in a house over there wrote down that, yeah, they don't get to be here anymore. Again, the answer was for the enforcers to wake up, and in that case, obviously, they didn't. And there was, mass murder and then forced eviction from where people had lived for thousands of years. But I don't ever think, let's add a new authority and a new aggression is ever the answer, because then you just have two evils to choose between.
But sometimes doesn't discipline have to fight discipline? I know it's an emergency situation and it should always be temporary. Another example comes to mind is a ship or a boat, right? A boat is an emergency situation. A meeting, in a way, is a kind of an emergency situation. You can only have one person speaking at a time, so you have to give authority, which we've kind of given to you as chairman of the meeting.
But you didn't, and I can demonstrate it. Everybody here give me $1,000. I don't have the right to rule. You're here voluntarily.
To preside over the meeting, not to rob us.
But that's not, like, the only authority here is an authority, which is the people who own the place said we're allowed to be here, and the people who arranged it said, I'm going to be the one standing up here. I can't do anything to your person and your wealth except say, according to the people who own the place, you don't get to be in their place.
Authority is just a name for psychological power. That's all it is.
It's a delusion.
Yeah.
In the very broad sense, but there's a big difference between saying, well, right now you're the guy talking, and saying you have the moral right to rule us. There's a gigantic distinction.
I think voluntary is the difference.
Yeah, it's voluntary.
Yeah.
We're all here voluntarily. Is anybody threatened with violence if they didn't come here? Is anybody threatened with violence if they walk out?
We didn't, you didn't force us to give it to you. We gave it to you for the length of the meeting.
Right, or walk out in the middle. You're allowed to walk out in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody locked the door.
Yeah.
So yeah, the distinction is it voluntary or involuntary? And the involuntary, even if it's for some supposedly noble good, and an example I like to use that makes, everybody gets the answer right is, if I had the power to violently make all of you exercise for 2 hours a day and eat a healthy diet, you cannot deny that it would benefit you in health ways. Does anybody think I have the right to do that?
No.
No. Why not? It would benefit you. It would benefit the common good and the individual. Because you own yourself, and I don't have the right to commit aggression even for your own good. So I have to sit here and let you eat unhealthy and not get exercise. Here's what I do too, by the way. Poor me. I don't get to make you be what you should be for your own good. That's called freedom.
We already are.
Yeah. Let's see. You and then you.
Okay, a popular meme that's been spreading through the resistance in general here, in terms of everything, is you lose your freedom the second you fight for it. It's something I kind of disagree with. I was wondering what your take on it is.
You're talking about the meme of the sort of saying thing of you lose your freedom as soon as you fight for it. There's definitely that balance when it's a minority of people who actually believe in freedom and want it, and the first guy who stands up is usually the guy the tank runs over. And the thing is, again, on a practical basis or on a moral basis, self-preservation is no sin. The thing is, if everybody is concerned with just themselves, I don't want to make waves. I actually just did an article about this. If everybody says, well, I'm not going to be first to stand up, then you get mass murder because the empire gets huge because nobody did anything. The downside is if you're the first one to stand up, you're the first one to get shot down. So there's a truth to that. The thing is, there are lots of in-between ways to resist that are smaller or sneakier or whatever. And each person has to decide, what are you willing to risk and for what cause. The thing is, if everybody I'm going to mind my own business and take care of myself, look out for number one, and not make waves, that's when authoritarianism gets really powerful. And if lots of people say, I'm going to cause trouble and you might hurt some of us, you might hurt me, you might kill me. I mean, I go around and give these talks. I'm sure there's lots of people in power who don't particularly like what I'm saying. I'm not that hard to kill. I would be really easy to kill. So far they haven't, thankfully. And I'm not going to shut up until they do. And that's the line I've drawn. I don't suggest other people draw that line. But again, the mentality to me is the main thing. Because the more people have it, the less risk there is to any individual. But I do think if you're not willing to risk anything for freedom, just kind of get out of the way to people who are actually going to make the world a better place. To be rude about it.
Now that you've brought it up, what was the explanation offered to you on why you were welcome at PorkFest and Chris Cantwell wasn't, even though you essentially made the same point in the same medium?
I wasn't welcome. They didn't ban me. They didn't invite me back. I also didn't ask to go back. The question was about why I wasn't banned from PorkFest and Chris Cantwell was, there were some other, the thing is, I'll be really quick about this because this drama is sort of, in the big scheme of things, I don't really care, but it's a good question. So, the drama of them saying, we don't want to be associated with somebody who talks about killing cops. I said, wait a minute, what on me? I just gave a talk last year at PorkFest called Why Speak of Violence, which specifically talked about the fact that if you can't even discuss forcible resistance against an aggressor, you're just talking about how loud you're going to whine as a slave. If there's no point at which you're going to say, I'm not going to go along with this, you lose. You already completely lose. And I think there were personal things and there were other incidents that didn't show up in their excuse. And Chris Cantwell, is very blunt and intentionally rude and admits it, and I get along fine with him. So there was, behind the scenes drama, but I do think it was hugely inconsistent. And there was a discussion of it at PorkFest, although it was at Alt Expo, like same place, same time, but not officially a PorkFest event, where we discussed that. And the funny thing is that was discussed more than at any other PorkFest because they said, don't talk about that. If you tell a bunch of amateurs, don't talk about that, guess what they're going to talk about. So I sort of understand, like they want to be seen as more moderate and as not, but if your goal is to be accepted by a society that condones mass oppression, You lose. Like, the world doesn't ever change because you say what other people are comfortable with hearing. The world only changes when you say a truth that other people don't want to hear.
So I just, to follow that up, I think that, in their attempt to mute the point of Chris Campbell, they ended up with, several hundred wanted posters all around the campground and
Yeah.
a ton of attention brought to it.
And they made him louder,
Right.
and they made the message louder, and they made more people talk about it. So it didn't, doesn't work well when you tell, voluntary as to what they can talk about.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, what is your opinion about compulsory education for children?
It's evil, but keep going.
And the second one is that when there's a social imperative to work for, say, a big corporation, because the only way of getting money is either from that big from a corporation, or from the government. What do you think about those institutions both being coercive and institutionally, institutionally authoritarian? Right?
Okay, the two questions were, the first was about compulsory education, which is basically imprisoned authoritarian indoctrination, at least completely immoral. There's actually, I've helped with some videos that Josie the Outlaw has done. One is called A Prison by Any Other Name, that is about compulsory education and how it isn't teaching people to think, it's teaching people to accept slavery. So my short answer is it's immoral. You don't get to imprison people just because they're little. The other question was about when corporations or governments, when you're sort of stuck with the choice of you have to work for them or you kind of starve. Again, a corporation can't do that on its own without the government forcibly, legally ruling out other options. And a lot of that has to do with land ownership. Like a government will show up and say, everything from this line to the line 5,000 miles over there, it's ours. You don't own any of it. We're going to give it to our huge corporation buddies. And unless you want to starve to death, you don't have any land. You don't get to farm. You don't get to hunt, gather, or do anything. If you want to live on that land that we just declared we own, you have to pay us rent, known as property taxes. And golly gee, it happens that thanks to us, the only option you have is to work for our buddies in this giant corporation. Again, they can't force that unless they have the government there to do it. And so they get intertwined, and people blame the corporations and often miss. And, using government to do that is completely immoral. So what the corporations do is immoral. Well, people miss the fact that they can't do that if there isn't a government there. Like, if a private company showed up and said, we own all of Argentina, and everybody living there said, no, you don't, the corporation would go, oh, that didn't work. It's like, I'm a CEO, what am I going to do? Go door to door and tell them you have to... Unless they have a big, powerful government that they can convince to enforce their claims, again, all they can do is offer jobs or offer to sell goods, and all people have to do is go, no, I can farm my own, I can work for somebody else, I can do whatever. If you're not ruling out my other options, you're not oppressing me. Was there a follow-up? Okay.
I was wondering how the mere elimination of government would work to correct the incredible wealth disparity prevalent in this country.
Two things. The question is about how removal of government would deal with the huge wealth disparity. On the one hand, I don't care about wealth disparity. If somebody else got ridiculously wealthy off of voluntary exchange, which means every time he had an interaction with anybody else that made him that rich, they wanted to do it, I don't care. If somebody has $20 billion from trading with people who wanted to trade with him, I don't mind. And there's a word for minding, it's called coveting. And for Christians, it's a sin. I'm not a Christian, but I think it's the envy that drives a lot of government redistribution things is worse than the greed of the guy who wants tons of money, if he gets it voluntarily. However, if they don't have the government to give them monopolies and giant advantages, I think naturally a free market tends to even out a lot more than it does now.
What about the wealth that's not dependent on the market, like land?
Oh, yeah, land ownership. Right now, I don't want to get into this too much, but the concept of homesteading. Somebody doesn't get to step on the continent and go, this is mine. Anybody who lives between that and 5,000 miles over there has to pay me rent is bogus. Nobody has the right to do that. The concept that land ownership comes from homesteading, from using it. Like, I built a farm here, I built my house here. Nobody else was here. I didn't kill somebody and then do it. And having just come on a train across the country, I can tell you there's a lot of unused land here, but the government claims all of it. So you don't get to say, I'm going to live here. In fact, even if it gives you the land, it says you have to keep paying us for the privilege of owning your own land. We call it property taxes. And that's immoral too. And so right now, without government, there's lots and lots and lots of land, and it's not desolate wasteland, that people have the absolute right to go to and say, I'm just going to live here. Build a house here. I mean, frontier days was basically that. Well, there's nobody here. I'm going to build a house, and then it's mine, and this is my land. Now, if you have 1,000 people in 2 square miles, it gets really problematic. So far, we're not at that. But yeah, when governments by themselves or corporations by way of governments say, we own this giant tract of land just because we said so, now you have to pay for the privilege of standing on it. Yeah, that's bogus. It's like me saying, by the way, I own the planet. If you want me to leave if you want. If you want to stay on this planet, you each have to give me $100 a month to pay for rent for my planet. And that's basically what every government does, only most people believe it when government does it. But no, you don't get to just own a giant amount of land by saying you do. So that's sort of the libertarian answer to that.
Just a quick comment. I'm just totally amazed. For centuries, they've had government. They've always failed. And we just keep doing the insanity over and over and over again. It gets kind of disappointing sometimes, or depressing.
Yeah, it's talking about the fact that we do government over and over and over again for thousands of years, and people keep trying and keep thinking, if we just somehow arrange this right, it'll work, and people they never seem to learn the underlying problem. And we go from one nasty empire to another one, because people think, and this is sort of cliche, I say it all the time, but I'm going to keep saying it all the time, people think the problem is the guy who's on the throne. The problem has never been the guy on the throne. The problem has always been there's a throne to be on. And if you knock that guy off the throne, the next guy in line is going to be a sociopath. And you look how often in history you have a revolution against one nasty authoritarian regime, and you get a new nasty authoritarian regime. And to me, one of the most useful things the founding fathers of this country did was demonstrate what a bad idea limited government is. It was the most limited attempt to ever make a government, and it turned into the most powerful authoritarian empire the world has ever known. If that doesn't show you that limited government doesn't stinking work, I don't know what will. When people... So, and it is depressing, like reading Schindler's List and the Diary of Anne Frank and realizing the main opposition to the Nazis were the communists. And to me, that's just so depressing. Really? Your answer to a big collectivist authoritarian regime?
Well, there was a third party. There were the mild socialists.